Call that was never meant to echo beyond a closed room, a quiet, almost forgettable exchange that carried consequences far louder than any press conference ever could, because sometimes the most transformative moments in sports history don't arrive with flashing cameras or breaking news banners. They slip in silently, altering the course of an entire league before anyone fully understands what has happened. And that is exactly how the shift began between A'ja Wilson and Caitlin Clark, two names that would soon represent more than just individual greatness, but a collision between legacy and emergence, between dominance and disruption, between the past and a rapidly accelerating future. Because for nearly a decade, Wilson had existed in a space few athletes ever reach, a level of sustained excellence so undeniable that her presence on any roster felt automatic, inevitable, unquestioned. She wasn't just selected, she was assumed. She was the foundation upon which decisions were made, not the variable within them. A generational talent who had built her reputation through championships, MVP awards, and a commanding presence that made her synonymous with success in women's basketball, especially during her reign with the Las Vegas Aces, where she became both the face of the franchise and a symbol of the league's highest standard. And for years, there was no serious challenge to that identity, no rising figure capable of threatening her position at the top, until suddenly, almost without warning, the landscape began to change. And in early 2026, that change crystallized into a decision that stunned those who understood its implications. Because behind closed doors at USA Basketball, away from media narratives and public debate, a choice was made that signaled something far deeper than a simple roster adjustment. Wilson's name was left off, not because of injury, not because of fatigue, not because of any decline in performance, but because the direction of the sport itself was shifting. And stepping into that space was Clark, a player who didn't just arrive, she detonated into the consciousness of fans, analysts, and executives alike, rewriting expectations in real time and forcing the basketball world to reconsider what star power truly looked like in the modern era. Because Clark's rise was not gradual, it was explosive, the kind of ascent that disrupts not only opposing defenses but entire systems of thought. She didn't wait for permission or follow the traditional path of earning respect slowly. She commanded attention immediately, pulling in record-breaking audiences, filling arenas that had never seen such demand, and delivering performances that blurred the line between skill and spectacle. Her deep three-pointers becoming not just highlights but cultural moments, her confidence resonating with a generation of fans who saw in her something fresh, something fearless, something undeniably magnetic. And as her influence grew, so did the contrast between what she represented and what Wilson had spent years building. Because while Wilson embodied dominance through consistency and achievement, Clark embodied momentum, unpredictability, and a new kind of visibility that extended far beyond the court, drawing in audiences who had never previously engaged with women's basketball, creating a surge of interest that brought new revenue, new attention, and new expectations. A surge that should have been universally celebrated as a turning point for the league. Yet for Wilson, it became something far more complicated. Because as the spotlight began to shift, even slightly, it introduced a tension that had never existed before in her career, a subtle but persistent sense that the narrative was evolving in a direction she could not fully control. And instead of embracing that evolution, instead of recognizing the broader opportunity it presented, she began to interpret it through a more personal lens, seeing not just a rising star, but a direct challenge to her identity as the league's centerpiece. And that perception influenced her reactions in ways that did not go unnoticed, whether through carefully timed social media posts, indirect commentary, or shifts in tone during interviews. Moments that on their own might have seemed insignificant, but collectively painted a picture of an athlete grappling with a reality she had never been forced to confront before, the reality that greatness alone does not guarantee permanence at the top, especially in a sport experiencing rapid growth and transformation. And while Wilson continued to perform at an elite level, continuing to add to her already historic resume, the conversation around the league began to change, because for the first time in years, the question was no longer just about who was the best player, it was about who represented the future, who could carry the league into its next phase, who could connect with new audiences while maintaining competitive excellence. And in that conversation, Clark's name kept rising, not necessarily as a replacement for Wilson, but as a different kind of focal point, a symbol of where the game was headed rather than where it had been. And that distinction mattered more than any statistic or accolade, because sports at the highest level are not only about performance, they are about narrative, about perception, about the stories that fans and organizations choose to invest in. And as those stories began to shift, so did the decisions being made behind the scenes, decisions that prioritized momentum and marketability alongside skill and experience, decisions that ultimately led to that quiet phone call, that subtle but significant turning point where the balance of power began to tilt, not abruptly but undeniably. And in that moment, the broader reality became clear. This was never just about one roster spot or one player's omission. It was about the natural cycle of evolution within a sport, the inevitable transition from one era to the next, a process that can feel abrupt and even unfair to those who have defined the previous chapter, yet remains essential for continued growth. And in understanding this moment, in tracing it back through years of dominance, rising tension, and shifting perception, what emerges is not a simple story of rivalry or replacement, but a complex narrative about how greatness is both sustained and challenged, how legacy is both honored and tested, and even the most established figures must eventually confront the reality that the game they helped build will continue to move forward, sometimes in ways they never anticipated, driven by new faces, new energy, and new possibilities that redefine what it means to stand at the top.